Hi guys, and welcome to episode 1 of my Directors Ranked series. So this is a series where I'm just going to be going through all of my favourite directors, and I'm basically just going to be ranking their films. And I couldn't think of a better place to start than going with one of my all-time favourite directors, and that is John Carpenter. I've been a huge fan of John Carpenter since I was probably a teenager. He was such a huge influence on me. I just like how he was always very hands-on with his films, especially his early ones. And I just like how, most of his films are they're just fun, real good fun, good fun action films, horror, everything. He wasn't really the type of director who was interested in being, like arty or kind of wanted the critical acclaim. He just wanted to make really fun movies. He's definitely just one of my all-time favorite directors because of that. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, before I go into this, I'm just going to say that I am only going to be ranking his theatrical films. So I'm not going to include any TV movies like his Elvis film or the Body Bags film that he co-directed. I'm not going to include any TV episodes that he directed, because I know he did a few for like Masters of Horror. It's just going to be his theatrical films. So I've got most of these films on Blu-ray except for one. I'll get to that when I come to that film. So in last place, I'm going to go with Dark Star. So this is sort of considered to be John Carpenter's first ever film. And it's basically about a group of astronauts / spacemen who they have to go on a mission to destroy some planets because I think they pose a threat to humanity. And along the way, they just kind of get bored and just try to find ways to pass the time. The reason why this ranks last for me is because it's just kind of boring. It's quite clearly more of a student project than an actual film. Everything about it feels very cheap. The acting is pretty bad. I think most of the guys acting in this film were just Carpenter's friends who just kind of helped him out. The sets and the special effects all look really cheap. The film's only 80 minutes long, but it just feels like it drags in places. The story just, it just can't be stretched out into 80 minutes. It's more of like, it probably would have worked better as like a 30-minute type of movie. It's got like a certain charm to it. It's definitely worth checking out if you're like a John Carpenter completist, but other than that, it's pretty bad, I have to say. So next up, I'm going to go with what's considered to be his worst film amongst his fans, and that is Ghosts of Mars. Yeah, so this film is basically about a team that have to travel to Mars to pick up a fugitive who is being held on Mars, and they have to bring him back to Earth. But when they get there, they find that spirits of deceased aliens are haunting the planet. Now, I remember when I watched this film for the first time about 10 years ago, and I remember going into it thinking, knowing that it was his worst film, but I still had hope that maybe I would enjoy it. But there's just very little to enjoy from this film. The cast alone, you've got like Natasha Henstridge, Ice Cube, Jason Statham. To me, like those actors just kind of scream like B sort of B actors, if you like, that, not A-listers. It kind of feels like, none of the A-listers would star in this movie, so they just had to, go with some lesser known actors, and it really shows in the film. And I think John Carpenter, I've read that he was pretty burnt out when he made this film and that his heart wasn't really in it, and you can definitely tell when you watch it. He's just definitely going through the motions. And it's a shame because I feel like, like he could have had a lot of fun with this film like he does with some of his others. But yeah, there's a real cheesiness to this film. And I know like some other Carpenter films could be considered cheesy, but this is just cheesy and bad at the same time. And it's a shame. So next up, I'm going to go with Memoirs of the Invisible Man. Now, a problem I have with this film is that it just doesn't feel like a John Carpenter film. It feels more like Chevy Chase's vanity project. It's basically about a guy who accidentally gets turned invisible and he just has to go on the run. And yeah, there's really nothing to it. There's just everything about it feels so average. And like I was saying, it doesn't feel like a John Carpenter film. Like, it literally feels like the studio just put a bunch of directors' names into a hat and they just pulled out John Carpenter's name and they said, let's get John Carpenter. He's a competent director. He'll make the film for us. And yeah, I mean, again, it just seems to show in the film. I feel like, you know, he was kind of going through the motions when he made this film. There are some funny moments in the film. There's a really good scene with Chevy Chase where he's invisible and he basically, I think he knocks this guy out and he has to get in a taxi with him and he tries to convince the taxi driver that this guy's actually, you know, he's kind of using him as a puppet, pretending he's awake and that he's the one ordering the taxi. And there's some funny scenes with Sam Neill as well. I think Sam Neill's always great when he does like comedy stuff because I think you don't really expect Sam Neill to, you know, do that kind of stuff. But, you know, he works pretty well in it. But other than that, it's just a very bland, average film. It's watchable, but that's about all. Next up, I'm going to go with currently his most recent film, and that is The Ward, starring Amber Heard. So yeah, this is a film, it's basically about a girl who sort of commits arson at her home at the start of the film, and she's committed to a mental hospital. And she's sort of housed with a few other girls. And the other girls there tell her about a girl who was also there who suddenly disappeared. And then some strange things start to happen at the hospital. And, you know, the girls try to figure out what happened to this girl that disappeared. There's some creepy moments in this film. I like the music. I feel like John Carpenter was a bit more up for this film. But again, it doesn't really feel like a John Carpenter film. It feels more like, you know, one of the many films that came out, one of the many horror films that came out in the 2010s. It's okay. It's watchable. It's got a twist at the end, which is kind of, well, we've seen the twist before, I'd have to say. But I mean, like I say, it's not bad. It's not a bad film by any measure. Next up, I'm going to go with Escape from LA. So this is the sequel to Escape from New York, which I will come to shortly. Yeah, I mean, this film is just kind of okay again, but it just feels like a straight up remake to Escape from New York. It basically follows our hero from Escape from New York, Snake Plissken, and he's tasked by the US government to go to LA, which is now its own island, thanks to a horrific earthquake. And he's sent there to retrieve something, I can't remember what, but he's sent there to get it and bring it back. And along the way, he has some obstacles, some interesting enemies, and yeah, I mean, this film came out in '96. It had a pretty big budget, but you wouldn't think it. Some of the special effects are pretty bad, but you know, it's okay. It's fun, but it just kind of feels like the film just wasn't needed. It doesn't offer anything new after Escape from New York. It's an all right time, but yeah. That's all I can really say about it. It's fine. Next up is Village of the Damned. So this is John Carpenter's remake to Village of the Damned that came out in the 1960s. It was a British film. This is sort of the American version of it. It takes place in a small town in California. And basically this phenomenon happens at the start of the film where all of the women suddenly become pregnant and they all give birth to these children that at first seem like the perfect children, but then as the film goes on and the children get older, some strange, mysterious things start to happen, and then by the end, all hell breaks loose. I will say that this film has a really strong start. Like, I love the scene where, you know, sort of the phenomena happens, And it's got an intriguing start, but as the film goes on, it does become a bit generic, and a bit bland. It just feels like Carpenter's going through the motions. But I will say that the score is great. It's a classic Carpenter score, and it's just got it. It adds a great atmosphere to the film. It's good seeing Christopher Reeve and Mark Hamill, in a film like this. And yeah, I don't mind the film. Like I say, it's got a really strong start. It just, as it goes on, it just kind of falls flat by the end. Okay, from here on in, the rest of the films are all pretty good. It was quite hard for me to rank them. But anywho, the next film I'm going to go with is Starman. So this is basically about a woman whose husband dies before the events of the film. And sometime after, an alien comes to Earth and it crashes basically right outside her house, and it takes the form of her deceased husband. So right away she kind of, she's drawn to this alien. And then at the same time you've got the American government who are, they become aware of this alien and they go after him. And she basically decides to help him, and they go on the run. And their mission is for him to get back to his spaceship and to escape from Earth. And yeah, I really do like this film. It's just great fun. It kind of feels like John Carpenter's tribute to films like, It Happened One Night or North by Northwest, with a bit of E.T. thrown in there. There's some action, there's some comedy, there's some romance. It's a really sweet film. Yeah, I mean, is it one I go back to all that often? Not really, but whenever I put it on, I have a good time. Next up, I'm going to go with Vampires. So this is probably considered to be maybe one of Carpenter's more underrated films. Yeah, it's. I mean, what I like about this film is how the vampires are portrayed. It's basically just about a group of men who are vampire hunters, and they just go out hunting vampires. That's all you can really say about it. I've never really been a big fan of like vampire films in general. I'm not really into like, the vampires that are very charming and very romantic, good looking, the likes of Dracula or Interview with a Vampire, films like that have just never really been my cup of tea. But the vampires in this film, wow, they are just monsters. They are just wild animals. They go crazy. This film is really gritty, really brutal, really gory. Carpenter goes to town in this film. There's a really memorable sequence near the start of the film where I don't want to give away too much, but it's where a large group of people are having a party, and then this vampire just comes and just slays all of them, and it's so brutal. And yeah, but it's just brilliant. It really is. I also know that John Carpenter had always wanted to make a Western, and this probably feels, probably the closest he ever got to making a Western film. It's a lot of fun, vampires, and I definitely recommend checking it out. Next up, I'm going to go with what I think is considered to be sort of a favourite amongst fans, and that is The Fog. It's basically about this small community, sort of seaside community that is basically ravaged by this mysterious fog that has these ghost pirates in it. That's all I can really say. This film's got a great atmosphere, and the score is brilliant. One of my favourite John Carpenter scores. It's very minimal, very piano-driven, like Halloween, but yeah, it's just a really great score, and it really adds to the atmosphere of the film. I think that this film is at times a bit patchy. Certainly towards the end, I think some of the effects, some of the death scenes are not, they just don't feel like they're shot very well. I don't know. I feel like Carpenter kind of rushed the film a little bit. I know it did have a troubled production because I think he made the film, and then when he screened it, he didn't like what he saw, and he had to go back and do a lot of reshoots. And I believe he had to do the reshoots, editing, the music and dubbing, and he had to do all of that in a month, 1 month. And that's, I mean, now that just sounds crazy, getting all that done in a month. So I do feel like this film kind of does have a rushed sort of quality to it. But on the whole, it's a really, really solid horror movie. And like I said, it's got a great atmosphere. Next up, I'm going to go with Christine. So I think this is probably the first ever John Carpenter film I saw. And I think the only reason I saw it was because I was a huge Stephen King fan. I remember I got into Stephen King films and books when I was probably younger than I should have been. But once I got into Stephen King, I just had to see everything I could related to him. And obviously Christine is one of them. It probably wasn't until years later that I realised that Christine is actually, that it actually was a John Carpenter film. And yeah, I think like I have a lot of nostalgia for this film, and I do love it. I will say this, I don't think the movie is particularly scary. I think the scenes involving the car, probably the weakest parts of the film. For me, where the film really shines is with the story and the characters. It's basically about, this young boy at school who is, he's kind of nerdy, he's shy, he gets picked on by everyone. And he discovers this car, this abandoned car, and he just falls in love with it. And then as the film goes on, it's kind of like, if you read the book explains more, but the film keeps it more mysterious. It's like, is the car alive, or is it all in his head, and is he just kind of, being possessed by the car, or what? But yeah, and like I say, I don't think the film is particularly scary, but it just really shines with the story and the characters, and it's just really interesting to see like this character start off the way he does, and as he progresses through the film, and he's got his friends who start to get worried about him and they want to help him. So next up, I am going to go with the only film from this catalogue that I don't actually own on Blu-ray, and that is In the Mouth of Madness. Yeah, so this is a film that's basically, it stars Sam Neill, and he's this what is he? He's like a private investigator, and he's sent to this small town to investigate the disappearance of a famous horror author. But once he gets to town, strange things start to happen, and things are not as they seem. This is a crazy film. It's probably the only John Carpenter film that feels more like a David Lynch film or a David Cronenberg film. It's quite hard to follow. By the end of it, you're probably more left scratching your head. But I really do like films that kind of make you think, and you're just kind of wondering what's happened at the end, and you can kind of analyze it. And there's some just great moments in this film. It's really fun, really challenging movie. But yeah, I have a blast of it every time I watch it. Next, I'm going to go with Escape from New York. So I've already touched on this film, so obviously it precedes Escape from LA. And yeah, like I said with that film, this is basically follows the character of Snake Plissken, who's sort of tasked by the American government to infiltrate New York, which is now a maximum security prison, set in the future, obviously. And he has to go in there to retrieve the president whose plane has crashed on Manhattan Island. And along the way, he has to deal with gangs and, all sorts of strange individuals and convicts. This film is the epitome of cool. And it's got probably what I would consider to be my favourite John Carpenter score, which he composed along with Alan Holdsworth. I always think that his best scores were when he worked with him. And yeah, this film's just a blast. It's just a lot of fun, and there's some great action in it. Kurt Russell's great as Snake Plissken. You've got Donald Pleasence there as the president. The film's just a lot of fun and not to be taken too seriously. Next, I'm going to go with Assault on Precinct 13. Right from the opening moments with that iconic music score, again by John Carpenter, you just know this movie is going to be cool, and it is cool. Kind of another throwback to sort of westerns, but obviously just in a more modern setting, a more urban setting as well. But Basically, it's about this police precinct that is shutting down, and we've got a guy who is attacked by some thugs, and they chase after him, and he ends up at this police precinct, and obviously the police officers there, they take him in and they want to help him, but then the precinct becomes overrun with gangs of thugs who want this man that they've been chasing, and they basically just have to hold the fort and fight back. Like I said, it's like a Western, but there's shades of like Night of the Living Dead in there as well. And yeah, it's just a really cool film. This was Carpenter's first proper film, if you're not counting Dark Star. And yeah, I really can't say much more than that. It's just a really, really fun movie. It's very dark in places, but it's just great entertainment. So I'm into my top 5 now. So in 5th place, I am going to go with They Live. This is a very iconic film. I feel like it's become more well known in recent years because of all the memes that's associated with it. But yeah, this is basically about a guy who he comes to LA. He's a drifter. He doesn't have anywhere to go, and he just tries to find work there. And he comes across like a pair of sunglasses, and when he puts them on, he's able to see the world for what it actually is. And the world has actually been taken over by aliens, and only through wearing these sunglasses can you actually see the aliens for what they are. And there's like a sort of an invasion of the body snatchers kind of tone to it. Obviously, some of the aliens are pretending to be humans, and he obviously, because he finds out, he has to kind of go on the run and try to convince his friends that he's not crazy and that the world has actually been taken over by aliens. I will say this about the film. It does take a while to get going. It's got a very slow start. I remember seeing this years ago and loving it. And then me and my girlfriend went to see it in the cinema because she'd never seen it. And I just remember watching it in the cinema, and I was sitting there and I was like, God, I don't remember this film being so slow to start. But once it gets going, it is just a hell of a ride. I love Roddy Piper in this film. I think, he's actually got, a charm to him and some charisma. I know he was like a wrestler, but, I think he was actually a really solid leading man, and he was well suited for films like this. Obviously, the film's got the very famous fight sequence between him and Keith David as well, which is probably the highlight of the film. Just a really fun, hilarious, but also brutal fight. And yeah, it really is great fun, this film. So in 4th place, I'm going to go with what might be considered a controversial opinion, but I'm going to go with Halloween. So yeah, this is probably John Carpenter's most famous, most iconic film. And yeah, it's a slasher classic. Definitely, ushered in a new era of like slasher films. Do I think it's the best slasher film ever? No, I can probably think of a few others. I certainly don't think it's John Carpenter's best film, but, I can't fault it in any way. The fact that he made it on the budget he did was brilliant. The score is great. Donald Pleasance is great. Jamie Lee Curtis is great. It's just a fantastic film. So in 3rd place, I'm going to go with Big Trouble in Little China. So this is probably the most fun John Carpenter film. I remember seeing this when I was very young on TV. I remember my dad seeing it in the TV guide, and he said to me, Mike, you've got to watch this film. You will love it. And boy, did I love it. And I've loved it ever since. It's basically about, this trucker played by Kurt Russell, him and his friend. They end up having to save this princess sort of deep in Chinatown in, I think it's San Francisco. And along the way, they just have to deal with all sorts, sorcerers, martial artists, just literally everything that will get in their way. And it's just a blast. It really is. It's so fun, this film. And I thoroughly recommend checking it out. So in second place, I'm going to go with what I consider to be John Carpenter's most underrated film, and that is Prince of Darkness. So this basically follows a team of scientists who have to go to this abandoned church, and there's like this sort of this tube, well, this I can't really describe it, like this essence in the basement of the church, and they go there to study it, but they unwillingly actually unleash it, and it's they actually open a portal to another world. And yeah, for me, this is John Carpenter's scariest film. There are some genuinely unsettling moments in this film. For instance, there's some dream sequences that all the characters have, where they sort of see into the future, and they're really unsettling. And yeah, this film's just great. The score again is great. The atmosphere is great. It's violent, it's gory, but all the characters are likable, and yeah, I just really like this film. Well, I love it, in fact, and for me, it's definitely John Carpenter's most underrated film. For my number one pick, probably not a surprise to many, but I'm going to go with The Thing. Basically about a group of men who are at this base in Antarctica, and they basically get attacked by this creature that is able to take the form of any sort of living creature. And yeah, it's a really frightening film, and there's a great paranoia to this movie where the characters don't know who to trust. There's a lot of mystery, and even in the end, you're still not really sure who the Thing was, and who was the Thing, who wasn't the Thing. And yeah, it's just a really, really great suspenseful film. The effects in it, I mean, they're just brilliant, absolutely brilliant, disgusting as hell, but amazing to look at. The score by Ennio Morricone, one of the few times that John Carpenter didn't score the film, and it's just brilliant, like absolutely brilliant. And yeah, again, the atmosphere in this film is just excellent. The characters are great. Kurt Russell, again, brilliant. There's just there is so much I could say about this film, but I'd be here all day. It's just an absolutely brilliant film. And, if there's only one John Carpenter film that you can watch in your life, I would say it would have to be The Thing. So there you go, guys. That is my ranking of John Carpenter's filmography. If you've got any thoughts about my ranking, then please let me know in the comments below. And if you have your own ranking, then again, please put them in the comments, because I'd be more than happy to see your thoughts on it. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. I've hopefully got a lot more content to come throughout the rest of the year, and hopefully next year as well. Until then, stay safe, and I will hopefully see you all very soon. So thanks again for watching, and see you soon.